It was 6:32 a.m. when my alarm buzzed like a dying insect, its faint vibration struggling against the silence of my empty apartment. I had been waking up at that exact time for 20 years, ever since I joined Barrow & Sons Manufacturing, the company that had become more of a home to me than any other place I'd known. 2 decades of loyalty, late nights, skipped holidays, and half-eaten dinners at my desk. 2 decades of believing that hard work meant something. I never imagined that one email, just one, could erase it all. The morning had started like any other. I brewed a cup of coffee, glanced at the framed photo of my old team on the counter, and forced a tired smile. My wife had left 3 years earlier. My son barely spoke to me anymore. But work, that was still mine. It was the one thing I could count on. I'd trained men who now managed whole departments, designed systems that saved millions in losses, and even once worked through Christmas Eve to help land a major client. The CEO, Mr. Barrow, used to say, "You're the backbone of this place, Alan, the kind of man who keeps the engine running." So that morning, as I tied my faded blue tie, I had no reason to suspect the engine was about to stop. The company parking lot was quiet, slick with dew. The security guard, Frank, nodded as usual. "Morning, Alan," he said, sipping from his thermos. I waved, pretending not to notice his pitying eyes. He'd probably heard before I had. The first red flag came as soon as I logged into my computer. My access to the financial systems was locked. Then the engineering folders. Then HR. I tried to brush it off, maybe a network update, but my stomach knew better. A cold heaviness settled in my chest. By 8:15 a.m., I got the message. "Alan, please see HR at 8:30 a.m. Bring your company badge and laptop." That was it. No explanation. No subject line. Just a digital whisper that sliced through 20 years of sweat and loyalty. I remember sitting there, my fingers hovering over the keyboard, feeling my pulse in my ears. Around me, the office hummed with quiet conversations. No one made eye contact. People who had once shared birthdays and beers suddenly found their screens very interesting. I had become invisible. At 8:29, I stood outside the HR office, clutching my badge like a lifeline. Through the frosted glass, I could make out the silhouettes of 2 people, Ms. Turner from HR and a man in a suit I didn't recognize. I straightened my tie, exhaled, and stepped inside. They didn't even ask me to sit before they started reading. Alan Reed. Due to ongoing restructuring and automation transitions, your position has been made redundant effective immediately. You'll receive 3 months of severance pay and continuation of health benefits until June. Their words fell like tiny stones, one by one, hollow and meaningless. I tried to speak, to ask why the restructuring didn't include the dozen managers I'd trained or the interns who still asked me how to print reports. But all I could manage was, "After 20 years, Ms. Turner looked down. The man in the suit smiled. A corporate smile, polite and cold. "We appreciate your service, Mr. Reed. These decisions are never easy." They escorted me out before lunch. By the time I reached my car, the morning sun had turned sharp and unforgiving. My reflection in the window looked foreign, like some tired ghost wearing a tie that didn't belong to him anymore. I sat inside and just stared at the building, the same glass structure I had helped design 15 years ago, when the company was still small, when Mr. Barrow himself shook my hand every Friday and said, "We're building something great, Alan." I turned the key, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I didn't drive home. Instead, I just drove, past the factories, past the suburbs, until the city skyline disappeared. I don't remember how long I'd been driving when my phone buzzed. It was an email from CEO barrowansons.com, subject for Alan Reed, confidential. My heart froze. I hadn't spoken to Mr. Barrow in months. He'd retired last year, replaced by his son, a man more interested in quarterly reports than people. The email was short. Only one line. "Alan, when you're ready to know the truth, open the envelope I left for you. It's in the drawer of your old office desk. WB." I pulled over to the side of the road. My mouth went dry. The envelope. I remembered the drawer, a locked bottom drawer of my old desk that I hadn't opened in years. I thought it was empty, I'd given my keys to a young manager named Simon when I was reassigned last year to a smaller office across the hall. Without thinking, I turned the car around. Security almost didn't let me in, but I told Frank it was urgent. He hesitated, then whispered, "You didn't hear this from me, Alan, but Barrow left a few things behind before he retired. Said it was for the ones who mattered." My throat tightened. "Do you know what's in it?" He shook his head. Only that his son wanted everything cleared out. Fast. The office felt different now. Colder. Emptier. They'd already boxed up my things. My nameplate was gone. But the desk was still there. I knelt down, pulled the bottom drawer, and sure enough, it was locked. I used a paperclip from my coat pocket, old habit, and after a few seconds, the lock clicked. Inside was a plain white envelope. My name was written on it in blue ink. Neat, deliberate handwriting. The kind that belonged to a man who never rushed. Alan Reed. For a moment, I just held it there, staring at the weightless thing that somehow felt heavier than 20 years of work. My pulse thumped in my throat. Around me, the office was silent except for the low hum of the air conditioner. I tore the envelope open. Inside was a folded letter and a small brass key taped to the corner. I unfolded the letter slowly. Alan, it began. If you're reading this, it means they've finally done it. I warned my son about cutting out the people who built this company, but he sees only numbers. You see, Barrow & Sons isn't exactly what everyone thinks it is. There's a vault, and inside it lies something I couldn't trust anyone else to protect. You'll know what to do when you see it. The next line stopped my breath cold. The vault's key is the one you hold. I flipped the letter over, but there was more. I left coordinates at the end of the industrial complex behind the old east loading bay. You'll find a red door. Use the key there. Whatever happens, don't tell my son. He'll never understand what this is really about. Then one final sentence, written faintly, almost as if his hand had trembled. It's not just money, Alan, it's the truth. I sat there, frozen, the key glinting faintly in my palm. My head spun with 1,000 thoughts. Was it real? Was Barrow trying to protect me? Or was this just the rambling of a guilty old man? But deep down, I knew one thing for certain. Mr. Barrow never did anything without purpose. And if he'd trusted me with this, it meant something. The next evening, I drove to the old industrial complex. It was past midnight when I arrived. The place looked abandoned, its metal walls streaked with rust and time. I parked near the east loading bay where the shadows stretched long across the ground, and there it was. The red door. It was smaller than I expected, tucked between two massive steel containers. I stepped closer, my breath clouding in the cold air. The brass key fit perfectly. My hand trembled as I turned it. The door creaked open to reveal a narrow passageway lit by a single flickering bulb. The smell of oil and dust filled the air. My footsteps echoed against the concrete as I walked in. At the end of the hall was a heavy steel vault door, half hidden behind old machinery. I brushed off the dust from its surface, revealing a faded inscription etched into the metal. Property of Barrow & Sons, 1984. I stared at it, heart pounding, when my phone buzzed again. A new email. From unknown. Sender. Subject. Stop. Walk away. You have no idea what you're opening. The message had no signature, no trace. And that's when I realized. Someone knew, someone was watching. The glow from my phone faded, leaving me in that narrow passageway with nothing but the hum of the flickering light and the metallic scent of dust. The vault door loomed in front of me, silent, cold, and ancient. I felt like I was standing at the edge of something I couldn't yet name. A secret buried beneath 20 years of loyalty, waiting to breathe again. I pocketed the phone and crouched near the vault's handle. My fingers brushed the steel, tracing its worn edges. I half expected alarms, guards, some corporate system to stop me. But nothing happened. The building was too old, too forgotten. Barrow's son had moved operations to the new headquarters uptown. Whatever was here, they had left it to rot. I turned the brass key in the small secondary lock. A click echoed through the corridor, sharp and final. My pulse quickened. Then, with a groan that felt almost alive, the vault door swung open. Inside, the air was thick and stale, untouched for years. Rows of shelves stretched out in the dim light, filled not with gold or cash but with boxes. Old company ledgers, blueprints, thick binders labeled with dates from decades ago. My first thought was disappointment. I had expected something dramatic, a hidden fortune maybe. But as I stepped further in, a flicker of understanding started forming. This wasn't about money. It was about history. At the center of the room stood a single metal table. On it sat a locked black case, small enough to carry under one arm. A white tag hung from the latch, to be opened only by AR. My initials. My breath caught. I ran a trembling hand over the surface, brushed away years of dust, and forced the latch open. Inside was a manila folder, a USB drive, and another letter, handwritten like the first. Alan, it read. You once asked me why I never took the company public, why I insisted on keeping the old factories running when every analyst said to automate. It's because Barrow & Sons wasn't just a business. It was built on a secret, a debt owed to men whose names were erased long before you joined. What's in this folder and drive will explain everything. I sat down slowly, the chair creaking beneath me. My hands shook as I opened the folder. Inside were copies of old contracts, signed decades ago. Some of the signatures were smudged, but one name appeared again and again. John Reed. My father's name. For a moment, my world tilted. My father had worked in construction his whole life. He'd died when I was 16, long before I joined Barrow & Sons. He'd never once mentioned any connection to the company. But there, in black ink, was proof. Contracts showing he had helped design the first factory grounds. His team had built the original manufacturing plant. And then, the letter that changed everything. It was from the company archives dated 1984, addressed to John Reed and Associates. It read, due to unforeseen financial strain, Barrow & Sons is unable to compensate your team for the additional structural work completed on the south lot. Payment will be deferred until profits stabilize. Deferred. But in the attached pages, I saw the truth. The payments were never made. Not a single cent. My father's signature was next to a stamp that said, settled, but the check number space was blank. Someone had forged the closure. Barrow & Sons had built its empire on unpaid labor, on my father's work. I sat back, the weight of it crashing down like a tidal wave. The letter in my hand trembled as anger began to surface, raw and blinding. All those years I'd given my life to this place, believing in its legacy, while the foundation of that legacy had been built on my family's betrayal. I looked at the USB drive on the table. There was a note taped to it. Play me when you're ready. I hesitated only a second before plugging it into my laptop. A video file appeared, time-stamped 2 months before Mr. Barrow's death. He looked older than I remembered, thinner, paler, but his eyes still carried that sharp intelligence. He was sitting in his study, the old walnut shelves behind him stacked with books and blueprints. If you're watching this, Alan, he began, his voice steady but tired, then I assume you found the vault. You deserve to know the truth. Everything this company became, every success, was built on a lie. Your father saved my business when it was collapsing. He designed the first plant layout, helped me rewire the production system when we couldn't afford professionals. I promised him partnership, shares, and payment once we stabilized. But when the profits came, my investors pushed me to erase the debts, to make it look clean. I let it happen, and I've regretted it every day since. He paused, rubbing his temple. I hired you, Alan, because I saw your name on an old record. I didn't know if you were his son until your second year. When I found out, I wanted to make things right, but by then the company had grown beyond my control. My son, he wouldn't understand what this means. To him, this is numbers and charts. But to me, it's a debt I owe. That's why I left you the key. That's why I left you what's inside the black folder under this table. He leaned closer to the camera. "You'll find documents granting ownership of a trust. It's in your name. The amount is not just symbolic. It's everything that should have been your father's, adjusted and multiplied through the years. Around $47 million. It's yours, Alan. It always was." I froze. My mind tried to process the number, but it didn't feel real. 47 million? After being fired? After being tossed out like garbage? The man who built me up had also built the company on my father's stolen sweat. The video continued. "There's one more thing. My son will fight this. He'll say it's fabricated. But the records in that vault, the signed contracts, the ledgers, they're legitimate. Use them wisely. Don't let them bury the truth." The screen went black. For a long while, I couldn't move. My entire life, every decision, every sacrifice, was now framed by a betrayal older than I was. I stared at the brass key, still lying on the table, then back at the letter. A noise broke my trance. A faint shuffle near the entrance. Footsteps. I turned off the laptop and dimmed the light. Someone was inside the building. I could hear the slow creak of a door hinge, then the faint scuff of shoes against concrete. I hid behind one of the shelves, holding my breath. The steps grew louder. A flashlight beam cut through the dark. Then I heard a voice I recognized immediately. "Alan," said a smooth, controlled tone. "I know you're here. It was David Barrow, William's son, the new CEO." He moved with the calm precision of a man who was used to getting what he wanted. His flashlight swept across the walls, pausing briefly on the open vault door. "So, you found it," he said quietly, almost admiringly. "I figured you might. My father always had a soft spot for you." I stayed silent, heart hammering. "I don't know what he told you," he continued, stepping closer, "but whatever's in there, it's company property. Those documents are confidential. You're trespassing on restricted grounds." I swallowed hard, then stepped out from behind the shelf. "You fired me yesterday, David. You took everything from me. But your father left this for me. You have no right to it." He smiled faintly, tilting his head. "You think he left you a gift? My father was sentimental. He liked riddles and guilt trips. That's all this is. Old paper, Alan. Don't make it into something it's not." He gestured to the folder in my hand. "Give it to me, and I'll make sure this doesn't go any further. I'll even extend your severance." The audacity of it made my blood boil. "You stole my father's wages," I said quietly. "Your entire empire was built on men like him. You don't get to bury that." David's smile vanished. His jaw tightened. "You don't understand the world you're stepping into. You think anyone will believe you? This company's worth billions. You're just a man who got fired and found a story." He took a step closer. "Walk away, Alan. You're not equipped for this fight." I met his gaze, steady now. "Maybe not. But I have the truth." We stood there in silence, the tension sharp as a blade. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away. His footsteps faded, but I knew this wasn't over. When I left the vault, dawn was breaking. The first light spilled across the concrete like a quiet promise. I looked at the folder in my hands, the USB still in my pocket, and felt something I hadn't in years. Purpose. I didn't know how deep the lie went or how far David would go to keep it buried. But one thing was clear. I wasn't walking away. Not this time. The next 48 hours blurred into one long, restless stretch of caffeine, paranoia, and silence. Every time my phone buzzed, I expected it to be another threat. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Barrow's face, his tired eyes in that video, the guilt that aged him faster than time. But what haunted me most wasn't the confession or the $47 million. It was the truth my father had died never knowing. He'd worked himself to the bone for a man who'd buried his debt under forged signatures and false promises. And now, decades later, his son, the man who fired me, was trying to bury me the same way. I stayed at a small motel off Route 16, the kind of place that didn't ask for ID as long as you paid in cash. I didn't trust my apartment anymore. If David had found me at the vault, he could find me anywhere. From the cracked window, I watched headlights sweep across the parking lot every few minutes, each one making my pulse jump. I had the folder and USB locked inside my briefcase beside the bed. Sometimes I caught myself checking it every half hour, just to be sure it was still there. The next morning, I called someone I hadn't spoken to in years, Laura Simons, an investigative journalist I'd met back when the company sponsored a local corruption expose. She had been young then, ambitious and hungry for stories that mattered. Now, she was a senior writer at the Chronicle, known for taking down corporations that thought they were untouchable. When she answered, her tone was cautious. "Alan Reed? I haven't heard that name in a decade. I need to meet," I said. "It's about Barrow and Sons, about the founder. And his son." That caught her attention. "I'm listening." "Not over the phone," I said. "Too risky. Do you still have your office near the wharf?" A pause. Then, "Tomorrow, 9 a.m. Bring proof." When I hung up, my hands were trembling again, but this time it wasn't fear. It was focus. For the first time since I lost my job, I had a direction. The next morning, I parked 2 blocks from the waterfront. The air smelled of salt and oil, and seagulls circled the rusted docks like scavengers waiting for something to die. The Chronicle's office was in an old converted warehouse, the kind of place that reeked of ink and ambition. Laura met me in the lobby, looking exactly how I remembered. Same sharp brown eyes, same confidence that made people either trust her or fear her. "You look like hell," she said, half smiling. "Feels about right." We sat in a small glass-walled conference room overlooking the water. I slid the folder and USB across the table. She opened it carefully, her expression tightening with each page she read. By the time she plugged in the USB and watched Barrow's recorded confession, her hands were still. When it ended, she exhaled slowly. "You realize what this is, don't you?" "An apology," I said. "And proof. This isn't just proof. This is a bomb. If this gets out, Barrow and Sons will collapse overnight. And if David's half as ruthless as people say, he won't let that happen quietly." "I don't care about collapse," I said, my voice low. "I care about the truth. My father died believing he was just another laborer. He built that company's foundation, and they erased him." Laura leaned back, studying me. "What do you want me to do?" "Tell the world." She hesitated. "You're asking for a war, Alan. Once this goes public, they'll come after you first." I met her eyes. "They already have." For the next few hours, we worked in silence. She took photos of every document, downloaded copies of the files, and made backup drives. I explained how I found the vault, the email from Barrow, even the message warning me to stop. When I mentioned David showing up, she looked concerned. "Do you have any proof of that encounter?" "No," I admitted. "But he knew where to find me." "That means he'll know you came to me," she said. "He has people in law, security, media. You need to be careful." I nodded, though I could already feel the danger tightening around us. She promised to start digging immediately, cross-checking the contracts with old public records. Before I left, she handed me a small black USB. "Keep this somewhere safe. It's a clone of everything. If anything happens to me, you'll still have it." I slipped it into my pocket and left without looking back. That night, I drove to my mother's old house, now empty and quiet since she passed 2 years ago. It still smelled faintly of cedar and her favorite lavender detergent. I used to come here to escape after bad days at work, sitting by the window where sunlight spilled across the old hardwood floor. Now it was just a place to hide. I set up my laptop and waited for Laura to call. The call came after midnight. Her voice was shaking. "Alan, someone broke into my office." My chest tightened. "Are you hurt?" "No, but they took my work laptop and external drive. They knew exactly what to grab. I had the originals backed up, but they're going to know you came to me." "Where are you now?" "At my apartment, packing. I'm leaving town until I can get this story published. You should do the same." I ran a hand through my hair, staring out at the dark street. "I'm not running, Laura. I've been running for 20 years without realizing it. I'm done. Alan, send me the article draft when it's ready. I'll find a way to get it out." Before she could argue, I hung up. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the floorboards felt like footsteps. Every shadow on the wall looked like movement. By morning, I'd made up my mind. If they wanted to silence me, they'd have to do it face to face. At 9 a.m., I walked into Barrow & Sons headquarters downtown. The lobby was sleek and silent, its marble floors gleaming under the morning light. The receptionist's eyes widened when she saw me, but I didn't wait for permission. I rode the elevator straight to the top floor. When the doors opened, David Barrow was already waiting. "Alan," he said smoothly, as if greeting an old friend. I was wondering how long it would take. I stepped out, gripping the briefcase. "You broke into a journalist's office last night." "That tells me I was right." He smiled faintly, walking toward the window. "You're in way over your head. My father's files are sealed for a reason." "You mean to protect your legacy of theft?" He turned sharply. "You think this company would exist if he'd paid every debt from 50 years ago? He did what he had to. And now I'm doing the same." "You mean burying the truth?" "Preserving what's left," he corrected. "This company employs thousands. You burn it down, you ruin lives. You think your father would have wanted that?" For a moment, his logic almost cracked something inside me. I thought about the men still working in the factories, the families who depended on those paychecks. But then I remembered my father's hands, scarred, rough, and steady, and the way he smiled even when bills piled higher than hope. "My father wanted honesty," I said quietly. "Something this company never had," David sighed. "I'm offering you an out. Walk away. I'll wire you $5 million. No strings. Disappear." The number hung in the air, almost suffocating. $5 million. Enough to live comfortably for the rest of my life. Enough to never worry again, but it wasn't about the money anymore. It never really was. "You can't buy back integrity," I said. "Not with me." He stared at me, his jaw tightening. Then he walked to his desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out an envelope. "Then you should know something," he said, sliding it across the desk. "That email you got from my father, the one that led you to the vault? He didn't send it." The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. "What?" "He died 2 weeks before that message was sent," David said calmly. "The address was spoofed. Someone else wanted you to find that vault." My mouth went dry. "Who?" "That's the problem," he said. "We don't know. But whoever it is, they're not on my side, or yours." I picked up the envelope, but before I could open it, the office phone rang. David answered, listened for a moment, then froze. "What do you mean the SEC is here?" He whispered sharply. I stepped back, pulse racing. "The Securities and Exchange Commission. Investigators." He slammed the phone down, eyes blazing. "What did you do?" "Nothing," I said. "But it sounds like the truth's already spreading. Laura. She must have leaked it." As chaos erupted outside the office, voices, footsteps, security scrambling, David turned to me, his face twisted with fury. "You think you've won, Alan? You have no idea what's coming." He was right about one thing. I had no idea. When I finally stepped outside into the sunlight, the sound of sirens filled the air. Reporters were already gathering, cameras flashing. Someone shouted my name. I didn't stop walking. In my pocket, my phone buzzed again. A new email. From unknown. Sender subject. "Good job, Alan. Now it begins." For a long time, I just stood outside the building watching the chaos unfold. Police cruisers lined the curb, reporters shouted questions, and the glass tower that had been my second home for 20 years now looked like a crime scene. Employees were filing out in confusion, clutching their bags, whispering into their phones. Somewhere inside, I imagined David Barrow pacing behind his glass office door, his empire crumbling faster than he could contain it. I wanted to feel victorious. I wanted the satisfaction of justice. But instead, what I felt was something quieter, heavier, a mix of relief and dread. Because I knew this wasn't over. Whoever had sent that last message, the one that said, "Now it begins," hadn't just known about the vault or the files. They'd planned this, and somehow I was their instrument. I walked away from the crowd, blending into the morning traffic until the noise of sirens became a faint echo behind me. My phone kept buzzing with unknown numbers, journalists, maybe even old colleagues trying to understand what had happened. I ignored every call until one came through that stopped me cold. Laura. Her voice was low and urgent. "Alan, they're saying your name on every channel. They're painting you as the whistleblower." "I figured they would," I said, watching a bus pass by. "I didn't leak it, Laura. You did. I sent it to one contact, securely. I didn't expect it to explode this fast. The SEC's all over them, but this thing's bigger than I thought. There's talk of offshore accounts, falsified records, decades of corruption." I pinched the bridge of my nose. "You're telling me Barrow & Sons was laundering money?" "That's what it looks like. And there's something else." She hesitated, then added, "The unknown sender, the one who emailed you first? My tech guy traced the IP. It didn't come from inside the company." "Then where?" She paused. "From Zurich, a legal firm connected to something called the Fenner Trust." The name hit me like a jolt. Wait, Fenner? That name was on one of the contracts my father signed. Exactly. I think whoever sent that email isn't just some whistleblower. They're tied to the origins of the company, maybe one of Barrow's old partners, someone who knew the truth long before we did. My pulse quickened. So they wanted this to come out. "Looks that way," she said. "But there's more, Alan. The trust account Barrow mentioned in his video, the one with 47 million in your name, it's real." I checked. "But it's frozen." I stopped walking. "Frozen? By who?" "By court order. It's under review by federal investigators. Until they verify where that money came from, you can't touch it." I leaned against a lamppost, the city spinning around me. So I just lost my job, burned every bridge I had, and started a war for money I can't even access. "Not just money," she said quietly. "A legacy, and maybe a target, meaning whoever orchestrated this, whoever sent that email, just used you to light the match. Now the fire's out of control." Before I could respond, the line went dead. I stood there for a moment, letting her words sink in. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I went home. The apartment felt smaller than ever, its quiet pressing against me like a weight. I tossed my phone on the counter and stared at the envelope David had given me, still unopened. Maybe it was another lie, another manipulation. Or maybe it was the one clue I needed to understand who was really behind this. I tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed in clean, formal language. "Alan Reed, if you value your life, stop digging. The truth you think you found is only the surface. Your father wasn't the only one betrayed. Others paid a much higher price. Leave the past buried, or it will bury you." Goo. There was no address, no logo, no trace of where it came from. Just that single initial, F. Fenner. The name echoed in my mind like a warning bell. I looked around the room, half expecting shadows to move. My instincts screamed that someone had been ahead of me at every step, from the email to the vault to the SEC leak. I wasn't exposing a secret anymore. I was inside someone else's plan. The next morning, the headlines were everywhere. Barrow & Sons faces. Federal investigation. CEO David Barrow under fire for decades of fraud. Former employee named in whistleblower scandal. My face was on every thumbnail. A grainy photo from a company event, frozen mid-smile. Beneath it, bold text read, "Alan Reed, hero or accomplice." By noon, my inbox had exploded. Old co-workers, distant relatives, even strangers offering money for interviews. My landlord left a note on my door saying the building had been contacted by legal representatives requesting information about me. It was only a matter of time before someone came knocking. That night, I packed a small bag, documents, the USB, the duplicate drive Laura gave me, and left the city. I drove for hours without direction until I found myself outside the old factory district, the one where it had all started. The buildings loomed like rusted giants against the foggy skyline. One of them still bore the faded Barrow & Sons logo. I parked and stepped out into the cold air, drawn to the ghost of my own past. Inside, the factory was a skeleton of metal beams and dust. Machines long silenced stood like gravestones and graffiti covered the walls. I walked to the center of the floor where I used to work in my early years. I could almost hear the clang of tools, the laughter of co-workers, the rhythm of a place that once pulsed with life. Then I saw it. A figure standing near the far wall, motionless in the shadows. Alan Reed, a voice said softly. "You're more persistent than I expected." I froze. "Who are you?" The man stepped forward, his face catching the faint light from a broken window. He was older, maybe in his 60s, dressed in a black coat and gloves. His expression was calm, but his eyes carried the weight of something darker. "Name's Franklin Fenner," he said. "You've been reading my name for days." My pulse jumped. "You sent the emails," he nodded. "Barrow owed me, just like he owed your father. But unlike him, I didn't die waiting for justice. I built my own. What do you want from me?" I demanded. "To finish what he started," Fenner said. "Barrow tried to pay his debt with a confession and a fortune. But that money wasn't his to give. It belonged to the men who bled for him. I made sure it found its way back into the world, through you." I stared at him. "You used me. I gave you purpose," he corrected. "Without my email, you'd still be sitting at that desk, waiting for someone to thank you for your loyalty. You were the perfect voice, honest, credible, invisible until it mattered." My hands clenched. "You started a federal investigation." I did what Barrow never had the courage to do. Expose the rot. The difference is, I don't care how much burns in the process. He took a step closer, lowering his voice. "You think this ends with David Barrow? He's just the surface. The real people, the investors, the politicians who protected him, they're still out there. And they'll come for you before they come for me. Why tell me this? Because you've already chosen a side," he said. "And whether you know it or not, you're in the middle of something that doesn't forgive mistakes." He turned to leave, then paused at the doorway. "You'll be contacted again soon. When that happens, don't run. Just listen." Then he disappeared into the fog. I stood there for a long time, staring at the place where he'd stood. The air felt colder, the silence heavier. My father's ghost, Barrow's guilt, Fenner's revenge, they were all tangled together now, and somehow I was the thread pulling them tighter. When I finally left, dawn was breaking again. I drove until I found a diner on the outskirts of town. The waitress poured me coffee and asked if I wanted breakfast. I nodded, but my eyes were on the window. Outside, a black car sat parked across the street. Its engine was running. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, just coincidence, but when I stepped outside an hour later, it was gone. In its place was an envelope taped to my windshield. No name, no address. Inside, a single line typed on white paper. "The truth has only begun to cost." I didn't drive straight away. I sat behind the wheel staring at that note for what felt like hours, the words burning through me like acid. "The truth has only begun to cost." I kept turning it over in my hands, searching for hidden meaning, a signature, anything that could explain who sent it. But there was nothing, just that single, clean line. I looked around the parking lot. It was empty, except for an old pickup and a stray cat weaving between the trash bins. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I tore the note in half, then quarters, then smaller, until it was confetti on the passenger seat. But even as I scattered it, I knew it didn't matter. Whoever was pulling the strings was already ahead of me. Fenner's warning replayed in my head on a loop. He'd said I'd be contacted again soon. Maybe this was it. A message, a threat, or both. I started the engine and pulled onto the highway, heading nowhere in particular. The world outside blurred into gray fields and endless power lines. For the first time since it began, I wondered if I'd made a mistake. Maybe Barrow's secret was meant to die with him. Maybe my father's debt didn't need paying anymore. But every time that thought crept in, I saw my father's face, the way he'd come home exhausted, hands blistered and eyes hollow, still managing to smile like the world hadn't already taken everything from him. That memory was the only thing that kept me from giving up. By the time night fell, I reached a small town near the state border. I rented a room above a bar, paid cash, and kept the curtains shut tight. The news was still exploding across every channel. Whistleblower exposes decades of corporate fraud. Barrow legacy in ruins. Where is Alan Reed now? My name had become a ghost story overnight. Half hero, half villain. I turned off the TV and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the USB drive. The one Laura had cloned. The one with every file, every confession, every signature that proved what they'd done. My only proof, my only shield. I couldn't keep running, not forever. If Fenner was right, this was bigger than the Barrows. That meant the real fight hadn't even started. My phone buzzed. No caller ID. I hesitated, then answered. "Alan," said a voice I didn't recognize. It was deep, calm, and deliberate. "You've made powerful enemies. Who is this?" "You can call me Cole. I work with people who don't want what you found to disappear. But Fenner's methods are reckless. He believes in chaos. We believe in order." I gripped the phone tighter. "You're with Fenner?" "No," he said, almost amused. "We're what's left of the men your father worked with, the ones Barrow erased. We've been waiting for this to come out for decades. You've done what none of us could. You made the world listen. But now it's time to finish it. Finish it how?" "There are files still missing," he said. "Barrow wasn't the only one keeping secrets. There's a safe house outside Chicago. It belonged to Fenner before he went underground. What's inside will expose everyone involved. Investors, politicians, foreign accounts, all of it. You need to get there before he destroys it." I hesitated. "How do I know I can trust you?" "You don't," Cole said simply. "But you'll have to decide quickly. Fenner's already moving." Then the line went dead. I sat there, the silence pressing in like a physical weight. If Cole was telling the truth, then Fenner wasn't just a whistleblower. He was cleaning house. Anyone who could tie him to the scandal was disposable, including me. I grabbed my keys, my bag, and the USB, then left before dawn. The highway was empty except for the wind cutting through the open road. By the time I reached Chicago's outskirts, the city skyline was a gray blur through mist. Cole had sent me coordinates by encrypted text. They led to an industrial warehouse near the river, abandoned like everything else tied to this story. I parked 2 blocks away, tucked the USB in my jacket, and walked. My footsteps echoed off the cracked pavement. The air smelled of rust and rain. The front door was ajar. I pushed it open slowly. The inside was dark, but faint light seeped through broken windows. Rows of metal shelves stretched into the distance. Then I saw movement. A flicker of a figure near the back. "Fenner," I called out. The man turned and the dim light caught his face. It was him. He looked older than before, his coat soaked from rain, his expression unreadable. "You shouldn't have come," he said. "You planned all this," I said, stepping closer. "The emails, the leaks, even the investigation. You used me." "I gave you the truth," he replied calmly. "What you do with it is up to you." "You didn't tell me about the others, the politicians, the investors." "Because you weren't ready," Fenner said. "But you are now. Everything you need is here." He gestured toward a metal case on a nearby table. I approached slowly, eyes never leaving him. When I flipped it open, I saw stacks of documents, bank records, wire transfers, names tied to shell corporations. It was enough to bring down half the city. Then I saw something else. A photo clipped to the top file. It was a black and white image of my father, standing beside a younger William Barrow and another man. "Fenner." "You knew him," I said. "My father," he nodded. "We built that plant together. He was the best man I ever worked with. When Barrow cheated us, your father wanted to go to the police. I stopped him. Why? Because I thought I could fix it from the inside. I was wrong. By the time I tried, it was too late. Barrow had buried us all under forged contracts. Your father lost everything. He blamed himself. I've been carrying that guilt ever since." I stared at him, torn between rage and disbelief. "So this is redemption for you? Burning the company to ashes?" "This is justice," he said. "The system doesn't fix itself, Alan. You have to break it first." Before I could respond, the sound of engines echoed outside, multiple vehicles stopping fast. Fenner turned to the window, his eyes narrowing. They found us. I ducked behind a pillar as headlights flared through the cracks. Doors slammed. Footsteps approached, heavy and synchronized. Fenner pulled a pistol from his coat and handed me a small hard drive. Take this. It's the master file. If anything happens to me, get it to Laura. What about you? He smiled faintly. I've been running long enough. The doors burst open. Armed men in tactical gear flooded in, shouting commands. I couldn't tell if they were federal agents or mercenaries, but their precision told me they weren't amateurs. Fenner fired first, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. Bullets tore through the air. I crawled behind a workbench, clutching the hard drive to my chest. The next few minutes were chaos. Shouts, gunfire, metal shattering. I saw Fenner drop 2 men before a round hit his shoulder, spinning him to the ground. I wanted to run to him, but he waved me off with his good hand. Go, he shouted. Now! I ran through a side corridor, the walls vibrating with each shot. The exit door led to an alley behind the building. I stumbled into the rain, lungs burning, shoes splashing through puddles. Behind me, I heard one last gunshot, then silence. When I finally looked back, smoke was curling from the warehouse windows. I knew what that meant. Fenner was gone. I drove without stopping for hours, adrenaline keeping me upright. By dawn, I pulled into a rest stop and sat in the car, hands trembling on the steering wheel. The hard drive lay on the passenger seat, glinting faintly in the gray morning light. Somewhere on it was the truth. Names, numbers, evidence. Everything Fenner had fought to expose. Everything my father had unknowingly died for. My phone buzzed again. A new message. No name. Good work, Alan. Phase 2 begins soon. I stared at it, the words blurring. Phase 2. There was more. This wasn't the end. It was the start of something bigger than I could imagine. I wanted to throw the phone out the window to pretend none of this had ever happened. But I couldn't. I was too far in. I'd become the one thing I'd spent my life avoiding. A man defined by what he refused to let go. As the sun rose, I made a decision. I'd find out who was behind the messages. I'd finish what Fenner started, not because of revenge or money, but because my father deserved peace. Because truth without closure was just another form of silence. I started the car and pulled back onto the highway, the world stretching wide and uncertain ahead of me. Behind me, the ashes of Barrow & Sons were still smoldering. Ahead, the road wound toward whatever came next. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel lost. I felt ready.